The war in Iran is doing something that years of climate summits haven't been able to achieve, and that is moving some countries toward renewable energy sources fast. That's because ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz have pretty much been blocked since the war began. Thousands of oil tankers are stranded near the strait, and it's one of the world's most important channels. This is particularly affecting Asia because most of the crude oil passing through the strait is headed for Asian markets. Energy prices there are soaring, and there are fears of shortages and blackouts across the region. But there is a small silver lining, and that's amidst all of this disruption, some countries are now looking for alternative energy sources. And today, you're going to hear how countries in Asia are adapting to this new energy landscape. I'm Hannah, and this is What in the World from the BBC World Service. Here with me is Sean Wan from the BBC's Global China Unit. Hey, welcome back.
Hello, nice to be back.
I read that about 90% of ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz have been blocked, essentially. There's been a 90% decrease in the number of crossings. That's led to oil prices, which have gone up, and it's having a massive knock-on effect on food and energy, and that is particularly being felt across Asia. How are people there surviving day to day?
A lot of households in Southeast Asia, they rely on the energy coming from the Gulf to power their manufacturing, for example, to power their electricity. And in India, for example, a lot of households are having difficulty getting electricity from the gas. And also at the same time, we're thinking of fertilizers, for example, not just the gas, of course, a lot of things like agricultural fertilizers that have been blocked from passing through the Strait of Hormuz as well. So all of those things are having a major impact on food security as well in Asia, specifically in Southeast Asia.
I read that people's lifestyles have been really affected too. 4-day work weeks have been brought in several different countries: the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, limits on driving. The Indian government's asked people to work from home and cut international travel, and household bills have also gone up. Sean, you're an expert on China. How has China been affected by the oil crisis?
Before the war started, China imported a large amount of gas and oil coming from the region as well, specifically from Iran. But in reality, China actually has quite a massive stockpile of gas and oil before the war started. And China doesn't really release the number of their actual reserves, but a lot of analysts and think tankers have been speculating that at least there will be 3 months worth of oil that could buffer China through the crisis. And that doesn't include a lot of ships, for example, that have been on the high sea and they're bound towards Chinese ports, and then China could tap into those reserve as well. So on that level, China hasn't been affected all that much, but doesn't mean that has been affected at all. Right after the war started, you can see people line up in front of gas stations, for example, fearing that the price would have a major hike. Of course, the Chinese government did come in and subsidize the refineries, for example. So the price had been relatively stable compared to other parts of the world.
Is it now burning up more coal to make up for potential issues with oil and gas, and what kind of impact might that be having on the environment?
China has got a lot of experience in this already. In the past few decades, China has tapped into its massive reserve of coal, and the only thing they need to do right now, obviously, despite the fact that they're trying to scale down on their coal burning in the past decade to sort of diversify its energy source, is still able to sort of just tap into this plants to open them up to fire up the coal planting season, for example, and then just that's very easy for them to do. We haven't seen specific data in terms of how much coal has been burned in the past few months, but again, it's very likely China is doing that. And the most direct, immediate impact would be environmental.
Because is it much worse to burn?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We've seen images like those striking images from the past few decades where, for example, the city of Beijing, the capital, has been
smoke.
Absolutely, it's like cloaked in smoke, and that has changed quite a lot, I would say, largely in part due to for example, the diversification of energy sources, a lot of renewable energy as well. But if China is going to continue burning the coal, we might run the risk of seeing that kind of super smoky sky coming back again.
So let's get on to renewables now, because China is already leading the way in the development of renewables. Has that been boosted since the war began?
Absolutely. As you said, I think that it's a two-pronged question, right? The first one is what China has been doing the past few years already to sort of really accelerate its renewable energy. China right now is the biggest player in the renewable energy market. A lot of solar panels have been not just domestically manufactured, but also internationally exported. A lot of countries are relying on that as well. And obviously, if you go to China right now, in major cities, in Beijing and Shanghai, almost the entire fleet of taxi, for example, even privately owned vehicles, they are electric vehicles. So those things do not rely on the gas import or oil import from the Gulf. So we've seen a lot of the transformation in the past few years already. And another big important thing is China is the biggest refiner of critical minerals. Now we're talking lithium or cobalt or rare earth elements. And we've heard a lot of these things in the past few years already, especially in the context of China and U.S. competition. And for example, last year when President Donald Trump was trying to slap tariffs on Chinese goods, China threatened to halt exports of rare earth elements to the U.S. And that has a major impact because everyone knows this is the future. Everyone knows that renewable energy is the future. So China is holding on to that.
Yeah,
and that's
got lots of cards, hasn't
absolutely.
it,
China? So
yeah.
that's something that China's been doing in the past few years as well.
And we're going to move away from China now because we have been hearing from BBC reporters in other parts of the region.
Indonesia is a notable example of how countries in Asia are accelerating efforts to reduce reliance on imported oil and gas by investing in renewables and alternative fuels. Despite still importing around 1 million barrels of oil per day, it is pushing aggressively into biofuels. Just last month, the government fast-tracked its P50 biodiesel program, which aims to cut oil imports by blending palm oil into fuel. However, this has raised concerns about deforestation, as expanding palm oil plantation often involves clearing forests. At the same time, Indonesia is expanding its renewable energy mix through geothermal project and the Tirata floating solar plant, one of the largest in Southeast Asia. This ambition to win dependency on fossil fuels has sparked a real challenge of how to make sure this transition doesn't come at the expense of our forests and indigenous rights.
A country that still depends heavily on imported fuel, Vietnam is inevitably vulnerable to rising oil prices triggered by the conflict in the Middle East. In response, Hanoi is accelerating its transition toward cleaner and more domestically sourced energies. From the 30th of April 2026, the government officially required all commercial gasoline to be blended into E10, a biofuel containing 10% ethanol, as part of efforts to reduce the country's reliance on fossil fuels. Unlike traditional gasoline, ethanol, the main component in E10, can be produced domestically using agricultural crops. And Vietnam is not stopping at E10. The country is also exploring other forms of bioenergies, including biodiesel made from used cooking oil and agricultural waste.
So, Sean, if the Strait of Hormuz remains blocked and Middle East oil is no longer an option for many of these countries, are there alternatives? Are there other regions they could source their oil from?
Oh, absolutely. Even China itself is a major exporter of oil. Right after the war started, China obviously blocked its refineries from exporting oil. But just a few weeks ago, it decided to open up to the market because it decided that domestic consumption is actually secured. And on top of that, China itself, for example, has been importing a lot of sanctioned Russian oils. And then before the U.S. blocked Iranian ports, for example, just because the Strait of Hormuz was blocked, didn't mean that China was not able to import oil from Iran as well, because we have a lot of random fleet that came out of Iranian ports that go to China. And then, of course, we have major oil reserves in Angola, for example. In Venezuela, we had, we had a lot of talks in the beginning of the year about Venezuela as well. So the world has alternatives, but with that said, the Gulf is still going to remain the biggest exporter of oil.
It's going to take a real shift, isn't it? A real change in attitudes and in the process of supply and demand of oil. Sean, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Have you been affected by the oil crisis? Has your lifestyle changed because of it? Please do get in touch. I love reading your comments. You can leave us a comment right here, or you can send us a message on Instagram at BBC What in the World, or we are on WhatsApp as well. I'm Hannah. This is What in the World from the BBC World Service, and we'll see you next time.